And so you can see from that you cannot have ultimate meaning. It's metaphysically impossible based on the nature of values and acts and their relationship. An act is always separate from a value. And a point is a valued end that has to be outside the effort that aims toward it or that grounds it. And you can't have that with the project or the effort of the running of your life. And so ultimate meaning is metaphysically impossible, and nothing can give you that. Not even God. Because how is God supposed to give that to you? All that does, when you add God or the afterlife, you're just postponing the question of what the ultimate point of your life is.
So welcome everyone to today's interview, where I'm very pleased to welcome Professor Rivka Weinberg. She is Professor of Philosophy and Mary W. and J. Stanley Johnson Chair in the Humanities at Scripps College. Her work is focused on metaphysics and ethics, especially on issues related to meaning and purpose and bioethics. Her books include The Risk of a Lifetime, How, When, and Why Procreation May Be Permissible, and her new book, The Meaning of It All, Ultimate Meaning, Everyday Meaning, Cosmic Meaning, Death, and Time. This latter book will be our focus for today, but yeah, and she also has a variety of published articles on these and related topics, but feel free to add anything. But with that, welcome and thanks so much for being here, Professor Rivka.
Thanks for having me.
Great. So yeah, so as I said in the introduction, we're going to focus on your new book. I think was just made available as a recording a couple weeks ago, 10 days ago, something like that. And it's called The Meaning of It All. And to start, can you introduce the book? Like, what's the general idea, and why might someone want to check it out?
So it's a book about meaning, all kinds of meaning. So it's very broad in that way. And so it gets really clear on the kinds of meaning that there are and the kinds of meaning that we could have and that we can have. So I talk about ultimate meaning, which is the point of leading and living a life at all. And I think that's metaphysically impossible, which is really sad because we work hard at leading our lives. There's everyday meaning, which is the meaning in our everyday lives and in the things that we do and the projects we undertake. And that's really nice. And then there's cosmic meaning, which would be meaning in our cosmic niche or our cosmic role. And I think that turns out to be much less interesting or important or significant than we might think, even if we grant, whatever miracles anybody wants to paint whatever kind of cosmic picture they want. And then the book also talks about the role of death in meaning, because in the literature on meaning, most of the time people say that death is makes life more meaningful or makes life less meaningful. Many people say it does both. And I think it doesn't do either one of these things. I think it's really time that plays that role, that's necessary for meaning, but undermines meaning because it erodes meaning over time, the value and the significance of the things that we've done or our efforts and our commitments. And then I end in that last chapter of the book about time, I talk about different ways of trying to sort of solve this time, what I call the time meaning conundrum. A lot of people talk about living in the moment or other more metaphysically fancy ideas. None of those work. And then I talk about how to live in the acceptance of this time meaning conundrum and with the short lives that we have. So it goes from the very theoretical to the, in a lot of ways, very practical. So I think that's part of the appeal in theory, and also the expansiveness. So when I talk about meaning, I'm talking about all the kinds of. I just think like, what do we mean when we say this? And I think, well, we mean value, purpose, point, explanation, impact, significance. Though and then those are sort of what we mean by meaning. I would call those the characteristics of meaning, and then the three kinds of meaning. And the point of that kind of taxonomy or laundry list, sorting your stuff out, which can sound, kind of dull, is that it's very clarifying to see, well, here are the kinds of meaning, and here's the kinds we can have, and here's the kinds we can't have, and here's how to cope with our meaning lot, and how to make the most meaning out of our time, which is what gives us the opportunity for meaning.
No, good for sure. And what you say toward the end there, I was going to ask about this, because it seems to me that one of the more difficult things when thinking about meaning in this sense is, well, figuring out what we are even trying to get at when we talk about meaning, because it might be unclear and there might be different things that we have in mind. And so, yeah, maybe talk a little bit about how you're thinking about approaching that question about the meaning of meaning and like how you come to this sort of taxonomy that you explore in the book.
So, I mean, I think most people think about cosmic meaning because, and a lot of theology focuses on that, like the meaning of our role in the cosmos, God's purpose, our role in it, and the afterlife, things like that. That would all be what I call cosmic purpose, and that's a lot of the focus of meaning. And I think it's really instructive to think about that, granting all the premises. Okay, we'll give you whatever you call heaven or whatever you think God's purpose is, and how much meaning does that add, or how meaningful is that for a person? And then when I talk at ultimate meaning is a new category, I think. I mean, certainly the way I define it. And the way I came to that was really by thinking, well, even when your life is full of meaning, let's say as my life is, I have a job I enjoy, I have a husband I love, I have kids who are terrific. I still can walk around all day long thinking, what's the point? What's the point? What's the point? So why am I asking that question? And I think that's because I am asking, what is the point of the running of my life, which is this separate kind of meta project that we do. We do the things in our life, but we also run our life like as an agent. And that project, I think, also needs a point. I don't think it can have one, but that's how I kind of separated out ultimate meaning from cosmic meaning and everyday meaning. So that's how I came to those categories. The characteristics of value, explanation, significance, purpose, point, and impact, I just came to by thinking about all the ways that people use the term, so that it's inclusive and I'm not leaving anything out.
Yeah, no, that's good. So we should probably start with maybe this broadest or maybe strongest notion of like ultimate meaning and purpose, most frequently tied up in religious context, but not necessarily. So maybe talk about that a little bit. How are you thinking about a sort of ultimate meaning here? And then I guess we can get to some of the pros and cons and concerns for it.
So when we talk about ultimate meaning, we mean, what is the point of leading and living a life? Why do this whole thing? Why do it at all? And in order to figure that out, we can think about, well, what is what's a point? A point is a valued end. And you do something for a purpose, the reason you're doing it, for its valued end. You're aiming at the valued end. So you build a hut because of the shelter or because of the person who's going to enjoy living in the hut. You play with your kids, even though you enjoy it while you're doing it, but you're doing it because of the value of love between you and the intimacy. And the value is always separate and lies outside of the act that it grounds or that aims at it. So a value is always separate from the act or the effort or the project. And so, and the value is the point. And so because a point always has to lie outside the effort or the activity that aims at it or that it grounds, when we're thinking about the project of our entire life, well, that includes all the values. That's in our life project, the project of running our life. We care about justice, so we put that in our life project. We care about other people, so we include them in the meta project, in this meta effort of the running of our lives. But that project, running your whole life, has nowhere to reach for a point because all the values that you're aiming at, they're in the project. And so you cannot have ultimate meaning. We can see that if we think about something like justice. Oh, great, I'm going to, justice. That's not in my life. That's about other people and future generations. But it's still, you care about justice. That's why you give it such a central role in the project of running your life. And so it is still in your life, no matter how far out it extends, and no matter whether it doesn't have, even if the effects or the reason is somebody else, the value that you're aiming at is still well within the context of your life. And so you can see from that you cannot have ultimate meaning. It's metaphysically impossible based on the nature of values and acts and their relationship. An act is always separate from a value, and a point is a valued end that has to be outside the effort that aims toward it or that grounds it, and you can't have that with the project or the effort of the running of your life. And so ultimate meaning is metaphysically impossible, and nothing can give you that, not even God, because how is God supposed to give that to you? All that does, when you add God or the afterlife, you're just postponing the question of what the ultimate point of your life is. So you get to the afterlife, you're there, and what's the point of the rest of your life, the rest of your afterlife? You have the same question. You have the same problems. If you're giving God a role in your life, that's still in your life. You reach the goal and you're like, well, what's the point of the rest of my life or the rest of my afterlife? And so because of values always lie outside the projects that aim at them or that ground them, nothing can solve this. It's metaphysically impossible. God can't solve it either. That's just sort of postponing the problem, putting off the reckoning to ask the question later. And so therefore, when we're asking about cosmic value or cosmic meaning, we can't think about ultimate meaning. Cosmic meaning cannot give you ultimate meaning. We can ask about other things. Can it give us cosmic purpose? Can it give us cosmic value? Can we have a cosmic impact? What about our cosmic significance? Those are all questions we can ask about cosmic meaning. But we have to concede or understand from the beginning that cosmic meaning cannot give us ultimate meaning because nothing can give you the metaphysically impossible. So that's the relationship between those two.
Yeah, no, that's good. I wonder what you think about, like, if someone were to say, look, well, God could give us ultimate meaning because what if they just say, like, our ultimate meaning or ultimate purpose just consists in something like knowing and loving God or something like that?
Yeah.
And that's something they can continually strive for even in the afterlife. I mean, does that make sense? Or would you still say that's either not ultimate meaning or not metaphysically possible?
It's not ultimate meaning because you can still say, why am I bothering? Like once I have this, what's the point of this relationship, right? The point has to lie outside of it and it's inside of it. What is the point of the relationship? If it's just to be close to God and have his love, so what happens when you do, right? And then you see that, okay, what's the point of the rest of your afterlife? So it doesn't answer the ultimate question. But you can still talk about cosmic purpose. You might say, and a lot of religious accounts do say this, that my cosmic purpose is to commune with God in the afterlife, right? To have this intimate, sublime kind of transcendent relationship with this perfect being or this great being or the creator. And that can sound meaningful because relationships can be meaningful. The problem is when you kind of think about how that's going to work, because there's certain problems we can have with that kind of a relationship. First of all, it is extremely unequal. It's a relationship of vast inequality, right? You're getting to know God's depths, and God is infinite, so it can take you an infinite amount of time or whatever it is to get to know God. But God would not be exploring your depths because God knows over your depths already, or at least enough of them to be a God. And so you have this negative aspect of inequality in the relationship. That's one problem with it. Now, not everybody minds inequality or minds it to the same degree, but it is something sort of like, well, that's not the best. And it puts us, another problem is that it puts us in largely a receiving role. So you're just sort of benefiting, you're like metaphorically sucking forever on God's infinite teat. And that's just an unappealing thing. Even if you like it, it doesn't seem like a great way to have meaning. And so you're receiving. It's like you're being, and the worst part of it, I think, is that as a purpose, it's kind of pathetic. You're partaking in God, enjoying his radiant splendor. I'm quoting from some, biblical accounts. So that's like being cast as the audience in your theater group's play. Like it's such a derivative role. It's not befitting human potential, which is another problem for it meaning wise. So although there's nothing horrible about about communing with God, and maybe you would like it and it would be good in a lot of ways, but there are problems for its meaning, and these are some of those problems.
Yeah, good. And then, as you also discussed a little bit, another concern as well, it's not so obvious that this is true, that not only that God exists, but that these are the meanings or purposes that he has for us. And so even if it can't give us ultimate meaning, we're not even sure they give us any meaning because we're not even sure if any of it's true.
That's true. But I think those kind of skeptical worries have gotten a lot. Everybody knows about those. And what I think is, that doesn't mean that they're not important. But what I think is sort of really worthwhile to ask, and that's why I asked the question in this way, is let us grant all the assumptions. Wave your magic wand, whatever miracles you want. paint whatever cosmic picture you want, it is still hard, even with all of that sort of practical leeway. Make things, run things however you want, have whatever kind of God you want. It is still really difficult to see how you get sort of a significant kind of meaning from this cosmic picture. And if you take a more Eastern view of, and some Kabbalistic view accounts have this as well, where your ultimate purpose is to return from whence you came, like a wave returns to the ocean, and you join the mind of God or the infinite consciousness, and you also shed the ego, give up yourself. It's like, all right, so and then you disappear, right? So great, you don't suffer anymore. That's nice, but you also don't suffer anymore if you die, like a regular person without a soul, and you disintegrate into the earth, right? Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. That accomplishes the same thing. So why is it more purposeful or more meaningful to rejoin the mind of God? It's sort of, you're just returning home because you were lost, but it's not an inspiring trip. And it doesn't seem very meaningful at all, actually.
Yeah. So I guess part of the worry, as I'm understanding, is that when you try to identify ultimate meaning with, I don't know, something about God's plan or something else like that, that there's always going to be this question, but like, why that? Well, what's the purpose of that? So maybe it's almost like an open question concern.
No, I don't think that's it. First of all, there's two separate things. I'm not talking about ultimate meaning because it's metaphysically impossible and nothing can give that to us. So I'm talking about cosmic meaning, right? And when I think about cosmic purpose, I'm thinking specifically about each cosmic purpose that we could have and whether that would be meaningful and how it would be meaningful. And so if I'm thinking about communing with God, I'm noticing some of the problems with that. It's a receiving role. It's unequal. It doesn't allow us to make use of our potential in that way, because we're just sort of passive, or we're sucking on God's infinite teat, where audience in the theater groups play, and therefore it's not an inspiring purpose. Similarly, if our purpose is just to rejoin, from whence we came, like, the mind of God or ultimate reality, the problem is that is not a very meaningful purpose.
Right, fair enough. Although, some people might consider it quite meaningful. So this is getting to something else that I was thinking about, because you talk about a little bit about how, okay, people might find great solace or comfort in some of these beliefs and about God and ultimate purpose, and even if it's not true, obviously their attitudes don't make it true. Maybe there's still something quite valuable or meaningful in those beliefs and practices and how they live their lives. So, like, what do you think about the sort of purpose that many people, in fact, do get from these sorts of beliefs and practices and so on?
So that's a different question, because that's really a question of their everyday meaning, right? Their meaning in their everyday lives. So how does it help? How does, let's say, belonging to a church or having certain beliefs give you a certain kinds of value? And maybe it does. And in that way, it would be everyday meaningful on par with other kinds of everyday meaningful values, perhaps. So that it doesn't, I'm not saying that religion is worthless or God is bad or these things are unimportant. I'm only thinking about meaning, right? So if I'm thinking about cosmic meaning, if you think about the purpose characteristic of cosmic meaning, I find it difficult to come up with one that seems very significantly meaningful. That's was the point that I was making. That doesn't mean that it is not meaningful to a person, let's say, to have a priest or something like that. That could be a spiritual leader, certain kinds of guidance, certain kinds of relationship, certain kind of good works maybe that are done. So that has nothing to do with the everyday practice of religion. It has to do with this idea more specifically of what kind of cosmic meaning could we have thinking about potential cosmic purposes.
Right. Okay. So, and then you mentioned everyday meaning there. How are you understanding that, and how is it different from like cosmic and ultimate meaning on your approach?
Everyday meaning includes, includes value, things that have worth. So, beauty, love, truth, freedom, because I believe in objective values. So it includes, and even if not, there's sort of good for a person. These are the things that are good for a person. So it includes value. It includes the impact we have on other people, the purposes, the things we do. Let's say I take care of my Gordon or my child, or I learn something. Well, it's valuable because of the values, the love, the knowledge, the beauty it has. It makes sense because it has a purpose. I'm doing things for a reason. I'm aiming at those valued ends. It has significance. It matters. The way I love my child matters, and it matters to them. It matters to me. It has an effect on them, so it has an impact. And those are all the ways, and those are just an example of everyday meaning, and how all those characteristics, impact, explanation, purpose, point, value, and significance are implicated in the things we do in our everyday life, in our efforts and our projects that are meaningful.
Good. And you talk about this at some length, but in the book. But so one common worry that some people have is that it's not clear that we can have any of this everyday meaning unless we have cosmic or ultimate meaning. So how would you respond to that and separate them out, such as the consequence?
I would need to understand why we need to have that, right? So the burden is on the other person, but I'll try to explain it anyway. The fact that I am going to take care of my child or plant a garden or learn something is valuable whether there's a God or not. Why do I need a God for that to be valuable? It's valuable because of the values. Excuse me. And yes, I don't have ultimate meaning, which is unfortunate. I have no reason or no point to running my life as a whole, to leading and living it. But I am alive, I am leading a life, and within that life, I can have projects that are meaningful. So that's the only game in town. It's a good game to play if you want meaning. The fact that you can't have these other kinds does not exclude this kind, and I don't know why they have to be connected. They're not connected in that way. They don't stand and fall together. I mean, in a certain sense, they could. What if there was nothing that was valuable? Then you couldn't have any meaning, or all the meaning you would have would be negative. But that is not the case. So what is the case, though, is that in terms of cosmic meaning, we don't see that, if we think about it, how whatever kind of cosmic role we play really gives us a lot of meaning. Ultimate meaning we cannot have, but there's no reason why, as long as there are things that are of value, which I think there are objective values or good for values that are good for a person, good for the functional systems that we can engage with them and have that kind of meaning.
Yeah. I'm reminded of there was this debate between William Lane Craig and Shelley Kagan, and this issue came up where Kagan made this response. It's like, look, just because I don't think we have the sort of ultimate or cosmic meaning or purpose, that doesn't mean we have no meaning or purpose simplicity. I mean, things still matter to us right now, and things are valuable to us right now and over our lives and over some scale, but not some eternal or ultimate scale or something like that. That seems perfectly. That seems fairly sensible, I would think, to say that. Yeah. So I mean, you talk about in the book about the different sources of everyday meaning. I guess you've touched on that a little bit already, but yeah, maybe comment a little bit more on the sources and like the psychological significance of everyday meaning.
So when you say psychological, so the sources of meaning are going to be the way that we engage with valuable, significant things in ways that matter, that are done in ways that make sense, that are coherent, that are grounded by reasons and aimed at values that have a point, right? And so that's the way in which things we do can be more or less meaningful. So if I teach a class that is meaningful because I am of the value of communication and education and enriching their lives, and so it's valuable in that way. But if I, let's say, change the world with the knowledge that I bring, let's say somebody like Freud or Darwin, that was more, or Jonas Salk, who invents the polio vaccine, that is valuable you can see that has a broader impact, so it's more meaningful on that scale, I guess. Not that I'm measuring things exactly, but just the general contours of meaning. Some things will be more meaningful than others because how much do they matter? What is their impact? How valuable is it? How significant it is? I mean, it's meaningful for me to make dinner for even for myself, because I matter too, but for a group of friends. But maybe it's more meaningful if I'm doing something that has a greater impact or a greater significance or engages with a value in a deeper way. And so those are the different ways in which value comes up in our everyday lives, but not on the same scale. Which also leads to the problem I talk about of waste, which is a failure to appreciate value or to live up to your potential. So if you can be, Martin Luther King Jr., and instead you decide to bag groceries or something, you're making the value mistake of waste, which is a failure to appreciate value.
Yeah. So I think part of the point, and you make in the book, and that's why I bring up the sort of psychological significance, is that you think that having everyday meaning is in some sense like sufficient or fulfilling for having a good life and having a fulfilling, meaningful life. Is that how you would put it, or what do you think about that?
I guess, I mean, sufficient for what? I don't think I think this is what I think we can have a lot of meaning in our lives. I think it's not, I think a lot of, because a lot of values are within most of our reach, right? Love is valuable, knowledge is valuable, freedom is valuable, beauty is valuable. All of those things are usually, not always, and if not, it's very tragic, accessible. And that's the way in which we can have everyday meaning, which for a psychologically normal person will be fulfilling. But even if it's not fulfilling for them, it will still be meaningful, which is another discussion another point that I talk about in my book. Because, for example, Susan Wolf says you need both. You need subjective engagement, a feeling of fulfillment with objective value. But I don't think that's the case, as we can see, the same way that we know value has to be objective. If you're counting the blades of grass on your front lawn, I mean, meaning needs objective value. It's not valuable, therefore it's not meaningful. You're making a mistake. The same way we can make the opposite mistake. We could do something very meaningful. We could contribute to the world in a very meaningful way. If I give the example of Jonas Salk, he created the polio vaccine. That was extremely valuable and significant and had a lot of impact. It was purposeful and had a really meaningful point. And if he fails to recognize that, or if he doesn't feel fulfilled by it, that is a sad thing for him, but it is still meaningful. And so that's the way in which meaning and feelings can come apart, because there's a lot of objective aspects to meaning. Value is objective, I think, and so is significant impact. I mean, they're all objective. Your own satisfaction and feelings of fulfillment are also valuable. So that will add to the objective meaning. Your subjective feelings will add to the objective meaning if you have them, and it will be unfortunate if you don't. But it doesn't. But it will still be meaningful.
Yeah, right. So people could do very meaningful things, or at least somewhat meaningful things, even if they don't like it, or they don't recognize as meaningful, or don't recognize it as meaningful to the degree that it is. That seems fair enough. Yeah, and I think pointing out the sort of symmetry there with meaningless things that someone might find very valuable is a fair point, or that they might find is more meaningful than they actually are. But yeah, that's also fair to point out that how people engage with it and the sort of significance it has on them can also contribute to its sort of objective meaning as well. Yeah, so that's a
right. So the objective account has the objectivists have a way to account for the subjective feelings of fulfillment that Wolf is concerned about. They do matter, but they're not determinative. It doesn't make something valuable or not. The same way that your belief doesn't make it valuable or not, your feeling doesn't make it valuable or not. Some people are depressed, which means that things don't feel that meaningful to them. But it doesn't mean that things the things that they're doing are not meaningful. It just means that there is a disconnect between the feelings and the facts.
Right. And then you've also mentioned cosmic meaning, and it may not be obvious how to think about cosmic meaning as separate from ultimate meaning. So I guess maybe if you want to introduce your approach to, or would you take cosmic meaning to be, and why that's different from ultimate meaning?
Ultimate meaning is the point, the valued end for why you lead your life. You run your life project. That is, cosmic meaning is the meaning of your cosmic role and your cosmic niche and your engagement with cosmic, let's say, purposes or values or things like that. So they're separate. If it was possible to have ultimate meaning, maybe that meaning could be cosmic. But since we can't have ultimate meaning, that's sort of off the table. So then we can talk about the meaning of our role in the cosmos or our cosmic niche, the value, our significance within the cosmos, our impact within the cosmos, cosmic kind of values. Maybe we could have everlasting values, perfect values, perfect. Those are all the kinds of things that maybe we could get if there was a certain kind of cosmic arrangement. And that is where I would put, that's how I describe cosmic meaning. So let's say people talk about cosmic justice, or some people even think about the universe itself as sort of aiming at value, and that's a kind of cosmic value. And so those are all ways in which we can think about cosmic value without talking about ultimate cosmic meaning, without talking about ultimate meaning.
Right. Yeah, good. And then importantly, you think that this it's at least possible to have different cosmic meanings, whereas it's not the case for ultimate meaning in the way you talk about it.
Ultimate meaning is metaphysically impossible. Cosmic meaning is not impossible. It just turns out that when you go through all the kinds you could have, and granting all the miracles, granting all the premises, it turns out even then, it just does not seem very meaningful. It doesn't really succeed. And so it's just not that significant and not the kind of game changer we would hope for. Certainly a disappointing miracle.
Right. And I mean, when you say not very meaningful there, like, in what sense, right? In the sense of like that we care about, or that's like, because in a cosmic meaning sense, it might be meaningful in that sense,
I'm not sure what you're saying, but I'm not sure exactly what you're saying. But if you're talking about in what sense, on each measure. So if we talk about cosmic purpose, which we just talked about, if we talk about cosmic value, if we talk about cosmic significance, like we probably have very little cosmic impact, we have good and bad impact, so kind of it's a wash. Or if we talk about our cosmic significance, or we can talk about cosmic, on all the characteristics of value. We can talk about cosmic explanation. What kind of story? Some people think that what a great kind of cosmic meaning we have is that we get a story. We get a story about the origins of the cosmos, and it's the beginning, the middle, its purpose, and a cosmic end. And we can think about that and how much value cosmic meaning it can add to our lives if we think that story could happen and what it could be like. And so, if we think about, let's say, cosmic origins. We don't really have an explanation for the origin of the universe, because the Big Bang is not the origin. You have to have something to bang. So we don't have but really, we have no particular account, but we don't see, it's not clear why either account would be more meaningful than the other or is more likely than the other. We can always ask, because we can ask the same way. I mean, Hume says this, if the world could be self-caused, why, if God could be self-caused, why can't the world be self-caused? And so it's not clear that a cosmic explanation of the beginning is any more satisfying or complete than a non-cosmic one. And if we think about a cosmic end, if we think about what kind of explanation would explain all the suffering that came before, it is very, very difficult to do that, is to imagine that could be the case, especially if you don't think that the ends justify the means. So it doesn't matter what the ends is, because we've already had all of a whole, at least, let's say on our planet, the way life is stocked with sentient beings who have to stalk and hunt and eat each other in order to survive. That is already a horrible kind of setup. And what end could redeem it? I don't think, so it's possible that no end could redeem it. And it's certainly not easy to imagine an end that could redeem it, especially when we think of something like cosmic justice, which has its own problems that I get into, right? Because of the eternal aspect of it. So if somebody does something wrong and then they go to heaven and they're punished, well, they shouldn't be punished eternally. They shouldn't suffer eternally for it, because how could you do something that would merit something like that? So eventually the punishment has to be over. And then the time of the punishment pales into insignificance because you have eternity to outweigh that. And so the whole idea of cosmic justice doesn't seem as as satisfying or as just as you might hope if you just say cosmic justice without thinking about, well, how could that really work? And so when we think that's an aspect of sort of cosmic value, the value aspect of meaning, but it also is implicated if we think about what kind of cosmic explanation can we get, and can that give us some cosmic meaning?
Yeah, definitely a lot of stuff to explore there. I did want to bring up a couple of sort of worries about cosmic meaning, or at least when applied to us, and then maybe a reason for thinking that maybe we have more of it than we might think. So probably the most common worry, and you've hinted at this a little bit, is stuff related to scale. Like in terms of the world as a whole, whether that be just our cosmos or something more than that, we're temporarily quite brief. We don't take much time of the total history and future of the world, presumably, and also spatially, we take up a very small portion of it. The world is very huge, and our small scale, or very small scale, seems to count against us having a sort of a significant cosmic meaning in this sense, especially since plausibly we individually and even as a species and life on this planet is going to probably die out at some point in the finite future. So yeah, what do you think about this worry about cosmic meaning from scale and our finitude and so on?
So I would separate that out on a lot of different questions. If we talk about
Sure.
if we talk about finitude, that's sort of like the fact that we have to talk about the relationship between transience and meaning, and how much does it what, and that I talk about when I talk about death, and I think that and so we can come back to that because I think that's a little bit separate. If we're thinking about cosmic significance in terms of how small we are, what's the difference if you're small? The problem isn't that we're small. It's sort of, well, there's two kinds of significance. There's relative significance, right? So that if you I don't know, if you stub your toe as you fall over something in your house and break 3 bones, the stub toe doesn't matter, right? It's relatively insignificant. But there is also intrinsic significance. So the fact that you're a person makes you significant. It makes you matter because of that. And it doesn't matter how many other people there are, you still matter. You have intrinsic significance. So it doesn't matter. You're not less significant now than you would be if there's 10 people, 1,000, there's a relative significance. Yes, if you're one of 10 people left on Earth, you're relatively more significant. But if there are billions of people in the Earth, it doesn't mean that you are insignificant. You still have intrinsic significance. I can't kill you and say, well, there's billions other, because there's no other you. And so there's these two kinds of significance. We have the kind of cosmic significance of just being intrinsically significant, and we occur in the cosmos. Who cares, right? That doesn't really make a difference. It just tells us we're significant. We're significant on Earth, and also Earth is in the cosmos, so we're significant in the cosmos that way. Now let's think about relative significance. Guy Kahane argues this. He says that we should hope that we're like the only intelligent beings in the cosmos, because that would make us more significant, and he thinks there's only relative significance. I think not only is there intrinsic significance, I don't think we should hope that we are relatively so significant, because that would come at the cost of so much value, which is also another aspect of meaning, another characteristic of meaning. And so that would be like saying, well, let's say there's a beautiful tree in my front yard, an oak tree, and it's intrinsically significant because of its beauty, and relatively it's not so significant because there's a lot of other oak trees. Would it be more meaningful? Should I hope, in terms of meaning, that all the other oak trees should burn down and then mine would be the only one left? Well, then it would be relatively more significant, but at the cost of so much value, which is also meaningful. So I think we should hope that we are relatively cosmically insignificant, because that would mean that we are in a much more valuable cosmos, which would be more meaningful.
Yeah, that actually gets at the sort of thing that I was going to point at in support of cosmic significance, is that like we are, although small, we're a kind of special, valuable sort of thing in a cosmos of mostly unalive, unconscious stuff. We're a sort of unique and special, maybe not, hopefully not too unique in that way, but you know what I mean. And that's maybe a sense in which we have significance in the cosmos. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I talked over you. But you're blurring the two. You're talking about us as being, right, the fact that we're not, that you're intelligent and have moral capacities and creative capacities, that makes you significant intrinsically, relative to other things maybe, but also intrinsically. So it doesn't matter what other kind of beings there are, you are intrinsically significant. You might also be relatively significant, but in terms of the cosmos, I think if you're thinking about cosmic meaning, you would have more cosmic meaning if there was more value in the cosmos. And so you should not hope to be so cosmically relatively significant. The same way you shouldn't hope for all the other oak trees to burn down.
Right. So there would be more cosmic meaning on the whole if there were more, beings like us. But would you say, is this the right way to put it, that we would have less relative cosmic significance if there were more beings like us? That's the right way to put it?
We would have less relative cosmic significance, but there is also an intrinsic aspect to significance. And I think the cost of being more relatively significant would be to have much less value, which is also meaningful. But I don't know if you want to get back to because there were two parts to this question originally, where you were talking about transience and meaning and the fact that we die.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess that comes up in chapter 4 and 5 more, but I don't know if you want to talk about that. You can just go to that.
It's just because you raised it at the same time and I kind of set it aside. So I don't want to permanently set it aside. A lot of people argue that death diminishes meaning because we are finite and we don't last, and the things we do don't last, and our value, our music is forgotten, our friendships peter out, and we die, and then things don't last. So how much does something what does transience or something lasting have to do with meaning? And so I think of the examples of an ice cream cone, eating an ice cream cone, building a sandcastle, or building a house. When you eat an ice cream cone, you don't want it to, if it lasted longer, it would be less meaningful. It would be too cold, it would be too sweet. You don't want that. You want to have its purpose is finite. It's not so hard to get one usually, and it's not a lot of work to eat it. And that, I think those are the three things that how much work something is, what its purpose is, and what our expectations are, have determined how much transience affects the meaning of something. So for an ice cream cone, the transience does not affect its meaning. Its purpose is supposed to be short. It's not a lot of work, and we don't expect it to last. Okay, now let's say we build a sandcastle. We don't expect it to last the next day, right? We go home, we know the tide's going to come in, it's going to sweep away our sandcastle, and the next day we can build another one or something like that. It's not that much work, and we have that expectation. But if somebody kicks it over while we're building it, that's going to diminish its meaning because it didn't serve its purpose. We worked on it and didn't get to finish it, and we expected it to last longer. Now let's think about a house. A house is a lot of work. It's usually more money than we have. It's not so much fun. We expect it to last a very long time, and its purpose is to last generations. And so if it burns in a fire 5 years after we build it, that's pretty devastating to its meaning and to its purpose. So now let's think about ourselves. Well, we have no ultimate purpose, so it's no less meaningful to us that we die. We do expect to die. And life is a lot of work. So maybe it's better that we don't do this pointless work forever because we don't have ultimate meaning. There is a loss imposed by death because we lose ourselves and we're valuable. So in that sense, there's sort of a meaning limit, a time limit, not necessarily not a death limit. There's a limit on how much meaning we can engage with because we don't last forever. But the fact that we ourselves, that our valuable things don't last forever, well, we don't have any purpose. Our lives are a lot of work, and we expect to die. So the fact that we die, I don't think makes our lives sort of, meaningless in that way, because our transience, if we think about what makes something, what matters in terms of transience and meaning, those three factors, expectation, work, and purpose, we see that when applied to our lives, there's no ultimate purpose. We expect to die, and it's a lot of work. That doesn't mean it's not sad or a meaning loss when we die, because anytime something of value is gone, that is a loss of meaning, because value is an aspect of meaning. But in terms of our own lives, it kind of just puts like a time limit on the value of our own lives. But our projects and And the things that we do, let's say the books that we wrote, or the music or the cakes that we baked, or whatever it is, or the justice that we work toward, the fact that we die is not what makes that transient. That time does that. If we lived forever, those things would still happen. And so that aspect of death, people always say, well, that's how death makes, undercuts meaning. No, time does that. If you lived forever, you would just watch it happen. And so that is what I think about the relationship between transience and meaning. And death is just a form of transient. The thing that's transient is you.
Right. But what about someone who thinks that they just really strongly expect that death isn't final and that we'll have a sort of eternal afterlife? To them, I think if they found out that we're going to die in some finite time, especially if we're talking about on the scale of a few decades, they might find that incredibly disheartening at the very least.
So if the same way that if you find out you have a terminal disease when you're 20, it would be disheartening, right? Because that would it's just a matter of the time limit put on the time that you have to engage with everyday meaning. And so if you think you have infinite time to engage with everyday meaning, then the fact that you don't would be disappointing, of course, but it wouldn't be because of death. It would be because you have less time. Right. So if somebody expects an infinite afterlife, what they're expecting is the infinite part. And so that's just qualitatively, it's just a different quantity. Qualitatively, it would be the same thing as somebody finding out that they're not going to live a normal human lifespan, which would also be very disappointing because it would give them much less time to engage meaningfully in their life.
Right. So it has to do with that's where the expectations become relevant there.
Yes, but it would be about but again, the meaning benefit or loss would be just a time benefit or a time loss. It doesn't have to do with the fact that a person dies. It has to do with the fact that someone who anticipates an afterlife thinks that they have an infinite amount of time.
Right. Yeah. And another thing you talk about as it relates to death is that in addition to death not this like undermining meaning per se, it in fact could actually give meaning in a certain respect. So maybe if you want to talk about that a little bit, how could death actually contribute to the meaningfulness of our lives?
So I don't think it does, although a lot of people think it. Many people argue that you need this time limit of death. Right. Yeah. Many people argue that you need death to have meaning in your life, because without death, you would have no pressure to do anything. You're going to live forever. So why should you wash your dishes today? You could do it tomorrow. You could do it the next day. You would never have any kind of time pressure. Martha Nussbaum says you couldn't be so courageous because you couldn't die for a friend, and all of these ways in which death is supposed to be a meaning enhancer. But I think here too, it is really time and not death that plays that role. Because if you never died, you would still have time pressure. You have to ask the girl out before she leaves the train station. You have to hire the band before the wedding. You have to show your children you love them while they're growing up. You still have those kinds of time pressures, and you could sacrifice infinitely for a friend, because you could sacrifice the love of your life. You're like, fine, you date him. Well, now that loss plays out over a much longer time period, or give away a kidney. So you can still suffer. Immortality doesn't mean invulnerability. You would still suffer and have, maybe even infinite suffering, because you would, whatever suffering you had could last a really long time. And so you would still have those same kind of risks and reward within your life, even because it's time that provides those things. You would still have pressure to wash your dishes, because otherwise you have to live with them forever. You'd have even more time pressure in a certain sense. And so you still have the time pressure, the risk reward, that is provided by time, whether you die or not. Scheffler argues that you need like the stages of a life in order to make sense of it. But you could still have finite stages within an infinite life. So it's not clear that if you didn't die, your life would just be just as would still be meaningful, because the risk and the reward and the scarcity and all of those ways in which that some people think that you need, some people think you need the narrative shape of your life, but you could still have like a serial narrative, like a soap opera, which doesn't necessarily, which can go on for a really long time, and still makes sense and has a structure. And so all of those ways in which death is supposed to be help give you more meaning in your life, it is actually really time that does that. Time is what's needed for meaning, as we can see if we imagine living forever. It's not death that does that, it's time.
Right. Okay. Right. Fair enough. Maybe I misunderstood, because I thought part of the idea was that, like, yeah, okay, you can still have these urgency-based or time-based or stage-based reasons for meaning or purpose if you lived for eternity. But the fact that you do live for some finite time and you expect to die in a certain time scale, that might add a further sort of meaning, right? And not like, because it might create pressures that you otherwise wouldn't have had, or at least would have had differently if you lived forever.
It could add a pressure, I guess. But that necessarily makes it more meaningful. It could actually make it less meaningful. And that sort of has to do with the duration, not sort of the concept of it, right? That you must die at some point in order to have these things. I don't think that's true. I think time is what does that. Time is what gives a life a shape. Yesterday, today, tomorrow. It makes things, coherent. You do things on a timeline. It's time that does all those things, not death.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. And then also importantly, death doesn't sort of like erase or undermine past value, right? Would you agree with that?
Let's say the fact that Da Vinci is dead doesn't make the Mona Lisa any less valuable, right? So the value lies in whatever the value was. The loss of yourself is a value loss, and in that sense, it puts a time limit on your meaning, and it's a loss of meaning because it's a loss of value. But it doesn't erase all of the meaning in your life, because that comes from the ways in which you engage with value, and whatever kind of impact and significance that has. Some of it is erased, but not necessarily erased or eroded by time. That has nothing to do with that. That would happen if you lived anyway. Right? If you lived forever, you would just live to see how the music you made, nobody's playing it anymore, or some of your friendships kind of, faded over time. You would just see that within your life.
Right. Yeah. And then that's something else you talk about, and you've talked about a little bit already, about how things can seem to sort of fade over time. And so someone might think that, like, from a compared to eternity, so to speak, all the stuff will fade away in significance, either because it just happened so long ago, or it's just not relevant to what's going on at some later time. And so someone might worry that from that sort of perspective, things might just lose a sort of meaning, or at least significantly lose a sort of meaning that we might otherwise think that they have.
That's the question. Yeah, but that's the question of how transience affects meaning, as we talked about. It has to do with its purpose, its expectation, and how much work it was. And so some things are not even meant to last that long. Most things are not meant to last forever. And so how much transience undercuts meaning varies with what we're talking about. And it's certainly, the kiss that the significance of it is not gone just because its meaning doesn't disappear just because it happened yesterday. So it's not like, oh, well, who cares? Sometimes the fact that something happened a long time ago doesn't always erase meaning. It has to do with the fact that your wedding is over doesn't mean that it's meaningless. It wasn't supposed to last forever. It's a one-time event, right? So we have to think about the relationship between transience and meaning in order to think about how meaning is affected by different kinds of transience. That doesn't mean that it is never affected. Time does erode meaning, because it can erode to some degree, but not to this all or nothing degree. It can erode meaning to the extent to which the things that we wanted to last longer, that was their purpose, that was our expectation, we put a lot of work into it, those things will also erode over time, and that is how time does erode meaning, which is the time-meaning conundrum, because we also must have time for meaning. Without time, nothing we do makes sense. We have no causality. Things don't happen in order. There's no reason to pull a kid out of a pool after she drowns rather than before she drowns. So we, and everything we do, all of our acts, are performances that unfold in time, and that's one of the many ways in which time is needed for meaning. So we need time for meaning, but it also erodes meaning. And that's the time meaning conundrum that we must accept.
Yeah, of course, time is important because a lot of the things that are meaningful take time, and
it's not just everything takes time. So our actions,
yeah.
but also if we think about the kinds of meaning. So if we're thinking about value, well, love is valuable over time, right? It's valuable because our intimacy grows over time. We know about a person's past. We spend time together. We have all those experiences in common. We do, let's say, the value of justice. We want to correct a past wrong. We want to build a better future. Those are all values that need that we engage with them meaningfully over a timeline. Significance, let's say, includes the past and the future. My grandmother's candlesticks are significant to me because of their past. The house I'm building for my grandchildren, or the whatever I'm doing for them, is meaningful because of the future. Impact also is most meaningful over time. I have the impact, let's say, that I supported my friend through when she was going through a hard time, and now that impact sort of has meaning in the past when I was doing it, and even now because of the past. I can do something for somebody, and it will have meaning because of the impact it has on their future. And so, in all of these ways, we can see how time is needed for meaning, and right. So we have the value, the significance, the impact, the purpose, the point. All of those characteristics of meaning are more meaningful if we include the past, the present, and the future.
Right. Yeah. No. Very good. And then, I guess one of the important discussions you have about this is some of the practical significance. Like, so how do you think that understanding and thinking about meaning and the different sorts of meaning can help us to, I guess, recognize meaning in our lives, but also cultivate it and increase it, so to speak?
I think we should, we have to aim high, fulfill our potential, exercise our higher capacities like creativity, emotional engagement, social engagement, morality, intellectual capacities. Those are all ways in which we engage with our meaningful abilities and our sort of things that are more valuable. We do things that have a great impact and significance. So we should aim high, which means we'll sometimes fail, which is bad for meaning. But that's the cost of doing business, because if you never fail, you didn't aim high enough, and you wasted opportunities for meaning, which is also bad for meaning. So either way, you got to have some problems. And then you engage with the meaning in your life over time, accepting time's wounds, because that's the only way to do it in a way that will give you the most meaning of the meaning that you can have over time, living in the fullness of time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And would you say that, like, I think recognizing these facts about ultimate and cosmic purpose versus everyday and meaning versus everyday meaning, maybe that should make us think, put more emphasis on our everyday meaning, especially the stuff that we can control in our personal relationships and so on.
Well, because ultimate meaning is impossible and cosmic meaning doesn't turn out to be much of a big deal either way. Yes, the way to have meaning is is to have everyday meaning, to engage with valuable values in ways that are significant and purposeful, and that make sense and that cohere. And then we cannot accept these solutions to the time meaning conundrum, like the people who tell you to live in the moment, because if you live in the moment, you will be missing the meaning that you get from the past into the present and the future, because that is how meaning is most meaningful over the full course of time. And so the live in the moment advice is maybe good advice for suffering less, but it comes at a very steep price, which is meaning. And so it is actually, despite its popularity, extremely terrible advice.
Right. Right. Yeah. If you live too much in the moment, you might fail to recognize some of the meaning from your past, and fail to recognize or even have some of the meaning in your future as well.
And you will not invest properly, because living in the moment is momentary. And if you are living in the moment, then why are you working so hard? Like when you're working so hard towards something, it may not feel very good, or when you're suffering for a friend or sacrificing for somebody, that moment might not feel great or might not be. And even if it feels good, that feeling is if it's just a momentary feeling, you will be missing the meaning, because significance is most significant over time. Value is valuable over time. Impact, purpose, point, all of those things require you to have a full appreciation of the fullness of time.
Good. All right. Well, I do want to ask like a more general metaphilosophical question about the value of philosophy. I guess I'm maybe probably already clear from thinking about some of this stuff, but what would you say is the value of philosophy? Why is philosophy worth doing, maybe individually or more generally? What do you think about that?
Well, philosophy is a very broad area of study.
Yeah.
But I think that thinking about, first of all, knowledge is meaningful and therefore valuable. And you never know when it's, and it's also practically valuable, although you never know when that's going to happen. I mean, sometimes you do know, but it could happen in unexpected ways. And so the value of philosophy is to critically to lead and examine life, and to think about how you're living it, why you're living it, and that can really enrich your life. It can make your life much more meaningful. Certainly areas like value theory, moral philosophy, but also something much more. So even let's say general metaphysics. What does it mean to exist? What exists at all? What does it mean to know something? If knowledge is valuable, we want to know epistemology. Because knowledge is valuable, we'll want to understand all kinds of metaphysics. We'll want to know about certainly value theory. And so I think philosophy is incredibly worthwhile because it's asking all of the biggest, deepest questions. And those are the things that are value, and that's valuable. It's valuable for its own sake, because knowledge is valuable and understanding is valuable and exercising our reasoning and intellectual capacities is valuable. And it is also practically valuable because it will help you know how to live. And God, I forgot who said, but to do philosophy is to learn how to die. And I actually think that is also true.
Yeah, I know that quote too. I forget at the moment who that was.
Yeah.
Was that Nietzsche or somebody else? I forget. I don't know.
I think it was Nietzsche, but I don't know. But in any case, that the idea is that so I think philosophy is both theoretically and practically valuable and meaningful and significant. So in all the ways.
Very true. Apparently it was Michel de Montaigne. I didn't know. But I guess I'd heard that before.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah. Montaigne. That's who it was.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I very much agree with that way of putting it. And yeah, thanks so much for coming on, Professor Weinberg, and writing this book and taking my questions and giving your thoughts. It's been great. It's been great having you.
Thank you so much. It's been a great opportunity and I really enjoyed it.